All right, people. We do not have time for our normal intro. Do you know why? Because we are beefing. Yeah, we're beefing with a fellow D&D YouTuber. Not just any YouTuber, but Ginny D. In her latest video, she put her parents up against a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and she acknowledged that she probably should have used something like a Triceratops, but she thought that that would be too lame. Full offense to Triceratops, she said. You know what I say to that? I say blasphemy. Heresy! You have committed a crime against dinosaurs. Triceratops is awesome, and I will not have him disparaged by this Tyrannosaurus Rex loving heathen. Justice. Justice for Triceratops. Okay, but seriously, Ginny D released a really awesome video about running a meat grinder for her parents, a game where she hoped to learn more about killing off player characters. And as a guy who talks a lot about loving difficulty in my TTRPGs, this video was definitely up my alley. I was really happy to see a big D&D YouTuber talking about difficult combat being fun, because oftentimes I see people talking about hard D&D combat or killing off player characters as hostile DMing. And while that could absolutely be possible, difficult combat that challenges the players at every turn can also be a really fun and engaging way to play the game. Ginny had a variety of lessons that she learned throughout this video. Death must feel earned, use modular prep, and give character death features. These are all really great lessons that she learned, but I do think that this video missed out on actually explaining, how to make the combat mechanically challenging while still maintaining that fairness aspect. I also think that a major takeaway that I personally have learned from years of running difficult D&D combats was missed in this video, and is often missed in discourse around running meat grinders. So today we're actually going to be addressing those two things. We're going to be addressing how I personally introduce mechanics to make my games both challenging and fair, as well as the big lesson that I've learned from running games in this way. Without further ado, guys, let's get started. Okay, this was a lesson that Ginny D definitely did talk about when she was talking about the modular prep style, but I do want to hone in on it, because if you want to run a difficult D&D session or a session in any tabletop game, you need to understand this. Every single party is radically different. Take a conversation that I saw in the MCDM Discord, which are the developers behind the new tabletop game Draw Steel, a game that I really, really love. Two groups of people were talking about solo monsters. These are supposed to be really challenging bosses that can fight an entire party on their lonesome. One group was saying solo monsters are way too overpowered and need a hard nerf before the game's release. The other group were saying that solo monsters are no big deal, that their party basically took them out in one round, easy peasy. So, who was right? Well, neither of them. As it turns out, one half of the conversation was running a solo monster for one player who was controlling 3 player characters. The other half of the conversation, the people who thought the solo monster was easy, they were running a game for groups of 5 people. Obviously, these two sides are going to have different perspectives on the same monsters. It's not just the amount of players, though. It's also the class and race combos, the amount of experience each player has. There are so many factors that are going to determine what kind of game you are going to be running and how challenging you need to make the combat in order for it to be believably difficult for the player characters. To be frank, a big reason why I have always enjoyed my combats with my players is because I have experience with the same group for almost 7 years of gameplay. I'm not playing with a bunch of different parties, a bunch of different characters. It's the same people all the way through. I know how they play. I know what strategies they use. During the campaigns, I know what characters they have, and I know what builds work against them and what they're weak against. But if you're a DM who jumps to a bunch of different groups, running one-shots, running for short campaigns, each and every one of them is going to be radically different, especially if they have different amounts of people. You can't expect a monster that worked worked perfectly for 3 people to work the exact same way for 5 people. It's just not gonna happen. This is actually my main theory as to why a lot of my fellow D&D YouTubers struggle when talking about encounter balance, because I don't know if I'm like spilling tea here, but from my years of interviewing D&D YouTubers, I have extracted the information that most of them do not run D&D long-term for the same group. A lot of them run one-shots, short campaigns, maybe they'll run for 1 to 2 years, but the vast majority do not run games for that extended length of time. There's nothing wrong with this, mind you, but it does mean that if you're jumping off from group to group, from different party composition to different party composition, each time you're gonna have to kind of reset your brain on how exactly to balance your encounters. The point I'm trying to get at is don't take everything I say here as complete gospel. I obviously think the advice I'm offering is good because I'm a narcissist, but it's not going to be perfect for your group because I'm not playing with your group. I don't know their experience level. I don't know how many people are there, and depending on those factors, you might have to do something radically different from me. Okay, with that baseline established, let's move on to how I mechanically make difficult combats for my party. My first step is finding a monster that works well at the level the party are currently at. My first step is looking at my past sessions, looking at my notes, and figuring out what monsters were precisely balanced for the player characters. Obviously, the first time around, I'm kind of throwing out a bunch of guesses. But it's not like my players are having one fight at level 5. They've had a bunch. I look at all those fights, look at which ones were easy, which ones were hard, and then use that as sort of my litmus test. For my first campaign, I was throwing spaghetti at the wall, just kind of going loosely on challenge rating and figuring out which monsters work. But now, years later, I know that, for example, this human bandit warlord, he was precisely balanced for a level 5 party. He basically worked absolutely perfect for them. So, whenever they reach level 5, this guy is my baseline. Now, like I said before, even if I am DMing for the same people over and over and over again, their characters, their builds, their level of experience, it's different. In my third campaign, they were far more powerful than they were before, meaning I had to power up this human warlord. And of course, I also wanted to reflavor him a little bit to fit more into the setting. So in the third campaign, rather than being a human bandit warlord, he was a vampire with more status conditions and effects that he could inflict upon the player characters. That is often how I adjust balance, either removing or adding status conditions. I don't usually mess with damage unless I'm DMing for more or less people. If the player characters are what changes rather than the amount or the skill level of the players, then status conditions will usually do enough to hamper them. Like, for example, poisoned will take out a rogue pretty easily. They need advantage on their attacks to get sneak attack, and any form of disadvantage will cancel out sneak attack entirely. That's what poison does. So if you have a rogue that's giving you some trouble, tossing in some poison effects for them to avoid will really spice up the combat. You don't usually need to adjust damage that much, though again, it is absolutely an option. Now, while I won't touch damage, I do often bump the health pool. Different party compositions can have radically different damage outputs, and my campaign 3 party could deal insane amounts of damage per round. If I wanted the combats to last more than 2 rounds, I had to buff this guy's hit points, especially since he is typically one dude fighting against a bunch of player characters. Speaking of, I often even out the encounter by adding small minions. Diverting player attention can be a very, very powerful thing. Forcing the barbarian to waste their multi-attack, taking out small minions rather than focusing on the big boss can completely change the dichotomy of combat. Have the minions inflict more of those status conditions that I mentioned earlier. They don't need to be high damage. In my favorite monster manual of all time, Flea Immortals, the minions don't deal high damage at all. Their main gimmick is status conditions and surrounding player characters. These things may not be downing them instantly, but it is certainly inconveniencing them, meaning that the players need to divert their attention. I also make sure that not a bit of the boss's action economy is wasted. Their multi-attack can be used for force movement, range attacks, hard-hitting melee strikes. They have multiple AoE effects. They have reactions, bonus actions. Every single part of their action economy is filled up. This is is a big thing that I see that annoys me when I'm looking at homebrew monsters that are supposed to be challenging. If you're not filling up your action economy and you're just like hitting the players twice, not only does it make the game more boring for the GM, but it's usually going to make the monster weaker. Take advantage of the entire turn and use every single one of their abilities. All of this resulted in a vampire boss that was hard as hell. It was down to the wire. Last second, the Warlock, last man standing, unleashed a clutch Eldritch Blast and saved the party from a near TPK. It was absolutely glorious. That was basically my dream, my perfect encounter balance for a final boss enemy. All the player characters on their last legs, desperate for the win. That's what I personally always want out of my combats, and that's what I got. So, since I know, and again, just like that human warlord from my second campaign, this vampire that I used in my third campaign, this is another pretty solid litmus test. Now I know this vampire is a powerful enemy I can use against my player characters whenever they reach level 5 again. Hell, maybe even buffing this guy, changing the mechanics somewhat, can allow me to reuse him in future levels in this campaign. Beyond that, I also want to acknowledge that D&D, like the DM's Guide, also recommends that you starve players of resources. At high levels, I absolutely recommend this as well. When you get up there, level 9, 10, all the way up to 20, your player characters are going to have a hell of a lot of spell slots, a hell of a lot of powerful features. And if you're constantly giving them long rests, it will disproportionately benefit spellcasting classes and make martials feel a little bit cast to the wayside. However, I will say at lower levels, I don't usually follow this philosophy. It can be very boring for spellcasters to be stuck on cantrips and first level spells the entire frickin' combat, so I try to avoid forcing them down that specific path. From level 1 to 10, I usually put my players up against 1 or 2 large horde fights, enough to burn some spell slots and force out some powerful AoE abilities from the Magi, but not enough that it's going to kill them once they get to the final boss. I still want people to be having fun with the game. Now, beyond starving players of resources, one really fun way I found of challenging players at higher levels is adding raid-like mechanics into the game. You know, stuff that you would find in Blackwing Lair in World of Warcraft or the Vault of Glass in Destiny. These mechanics challenge the player characters to solve puzzles while they are fighting, and they're really fun. Now, obviously, in World of Warcraft, in Destiny, you can respawn.
Damn it! No one goes home until our job here is done. Shut up!
So they have the ability to make these puzzles particularly confusing. I mean, the players can try them over and over and over again. Your players don't have that benefit 99% of the time. If they TPK, that's it for them. Expedition failed. However, there are ways to still implement these mechanics. You simplify them and give the players a sort of tutorial. In this video, I'm going to give you an example of a dungeon that I ran, how I escalated the mechanic over time all the way to its maximum level of complexity. You can copy this mechanic and use it in your own games, but I really hope this gives you inspiration so that you can come up with your own raid mechanics for your own dungeons. To introduce this mechanic, I started with something that wasn't even a fight. All they needed to do was open a magical door. There were a bunch of glowing things on the ground they could collect. Once one player character collected 3 of these glowing objects, they gained a buff called Insight. This allows that player character to see invisible objects in the area, such as the lever to open the door. This introduces the baseline. You need 3 special items to gain a buff called Insight. The players know, just because they've been playing with me for a long time, that this is a mechanic they're going to need to remember and use throughout the entirety of this dungeon. In the next room, the players once again collected Insight, but this time there was no lever to open the door. Instead of a door, there was actually a big monster that had heavy damage resistances. The players could still damage him, but in order to kill this monster without burning through all their powerful abilities, they knew something had to be done to strip it of these resistances. And that's where the next escalation of the mechanic comes in. You see, the players, the 2 players who at this point had Insight, they could see glowing symbols in the room. They communicated what symbols they saw to each other and realized that one symbol amongst them was shared between the 2 groups. They deduced that they needed to destroy this shared symbol, and when they did so, the monster's resistances were stripped away and they could kill it.
Okay, so the top symbol looks like a rock, but almost a bird in the center in a circle. The other one's a circle within a circle, and there's like little lines. Do that circle. The next one is like a man going like this, one with the triangle in his hand, one with the circle, and then one below it looks like kind of like an umbrella shape, like two umbrellas.
Okay, I think I got it because I have on the bottom the guy who has holding out his hands with triangle one side, circle the other. But
In the next escalation of this mechanic, I didn't make it any more complicated, I just introduced more barriers. Now, insight can no longer be collected by just grabbing glowing things on the ground. Insight can only be collected by killing 3 insight hoarders, enemies on the field. The player characters also saw that the symbols that they needed to find, they were no longer just glowing runes on the map, they were now hidden behind 2 large monsters that they needed to kill first. Essentially, the puzzle was the same as the previous encounter. Grab insight, look at symbols, find the common symbol, destroy common symbol. But now, there's a bunch of enemies in their way, escalating the difficulty, but not the mechanical complexity. You see how each of these levels introduce one more layer to the mechanics. It was never overwhelming to my player characters. If you introduce it all at once, that is going to confuse them. Introducing it slowly, building over time, that allows the players to really feel like they're figuring stuff out. And by the way, this is a great way to curb extremely powerful high-level player characters. The insight buff only allowed you to see these magical symbols from a certain small radius, forcing players to burn their action economy on movement abilities and sprinting in order to get from point A to point B. They also need to target specified enemies, meaning that high damage characters were usually burning action economy in order to do so. These mechanics introduced increased difficulty without me being forced to just insta-wipe player characters. They had to solve these puzzles, and it was really, really fun. I understand this is definitely not for everybody, but this is something that I have really, really enjoyed introducing in my own games, and is a really fun way that I increase difficulty while still making things feel fair for my player characters. Okay, so I think I've pretty thoroughly covered exactly how I make my games challenging. But what is that big lesson? What do I feel like was missed in that Ginny D video and is often missed when people talk about difficult combats? Now, I do want to say, I don't think Ginny D necessarily doesn't know this lesson. I guarantee she knows exactly what I'm talking about, but it wasn't the focus of the video, so I'm going to talk about it here because it's something I'm really passionate about. Difficult D&D, meat grinder D&D, doesn't always mean you're going to kill player characters. Like, do you want me to tell you something about my super hard sessions with all their mechanical complexities and puzzles? I've only killed people like twice. Yeah, I've only killed like 2 player characters ever in my entire DMing career. I've been doing this for like 7 years, and it's only happened twice. You want to know why? Because, like I said, I've been playing with the same people for 7 years. They've figured me out. They've adapted. When they start seeing mechanics pop up, they start taking notes. They start figuring it out. They start communicating with each other. They've gotten really, really good at foiling my attempts to kill them. Like, trust me, I am trying to kill these guys. I'm just not succeeding. They're better than me. They don't have a skill issue. Not only are they just good at figuring out the mechanics of my fights, but they also just made really, really powerful player characters. They aren't exploiting mechanics of the game. They're not making cheese builds that just insta-win every encounter by dropping, like, ice on somebody's head or putting water in their lungs. No, they're making legitimate builds that just build into what makes like a barbarian or an artificer a strong PC. They know that if they're not paying attention, they'll die. They know if they play a wizard with negative intelligence, they will die. They know all these things, and therefore, it's really hard for me to kill them. This is something that Ginny talked about too, and in my opinion, it's a feature, not a bug. I want my player characters to feel challenged. I don't want them to be dead. Obviously, if they earn that death by being stupid and not paying attention to mechanics and putting themselves in bad positions during combat, then that's on them. But if they don't do those things, if they build powerful player characters, then they've earned the right to keep on living. Look, DMs out there who want to run difficult games, if you want to run a meat grinder where you're constantly churning through level 1 PCs, that is a completely valid way to play. That sounds like an awesome game. But for those of you who want to run a long-form campaign that has super intense fights that challenge your player characters, don't feel like you're a failure if you don't kill anybody. The point is to make them feel scared, to put them on the edge of their seat. That doesn't always mean that they're going to be dead. But yeah, that is my response, addendum, add-on to Ginny D's video about difficult D&D combat. I really enjoyed hers. It's linked up in the cards and description. But if you guys enjoyed this video and watched it all the way through, then head down to the comments and leave the comment, don't need the kill, to let me know you made it all the way to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this episode, you might enjoy our latest D&D actual play, Liar's Dice. It's a wonderful one-shot. It's linked up in the cards. But before you go, please do leave a like and subscribe to Crispy's Academy so you don't miss any of our content right as it comes out. Oh, and finally, if you want to support us on Patreon, you can get access to an exclusive Discord, exclusive vlogs, and exclusive homebrew D&D content. In essence, like, comment, subscribe, support. I will see you all next time. Farewell.